After a week of vlogs considering the events of Easter week, I thought I'd give you a couple of days off before we turn our attentions again to the Psalms. But today we're going to look at Psalm 3. So I said to you last time we spoke about the Psalms that the first two are in a sense an introduction to the whole of the Psalter. And we now come to the first Psalm in what's known as Book 1 of the Psalms, usually referred to as the Book of David. And this is entitled A Psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. So it's entitled A Psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. At least 14 of the Davidic Psalms have life references attached to them. Remember, David was known as the sweet singer of Israel, and many of the Psalms reflect his life, incidents from his life. Last time round, I explained to you that because it was called A Psalm of David did not necessarily mean David had written it. I said it could have been written about David. So there's a number of ways of interpreting this. That David wrote it. It belongs to the collection of Psalms, as I've said, Book 1, which are about the life of David and the times of David. It could be a psalm that's dedicated to David or the Davidic king. It could be for the use of David or the Davidic king. Or it could be a psalm concerning David. But this particular one speaks about an incident in his life, referring to Absalom. E.M. Blakelock calls it one of the 5 Psalms of the Great Rebellion. And if you really want to understand this psalm, you would have to read the background stories. Really, they go back to 2 Samuel chapters 15 through to 19, although if you read chapters 13 and 14 as well, that would really help. But the whole picture of this goes all the way back to David and Bathsheba, and it goes further back than that. It goes all the way back to David's childhood. John Hercus, in an excellent study, John Hercus, an Australian doctor who's written a book about David, and he sort of almost like psychoanalyzes David's life, and he explains how David is the son of old age. His father has been married before, and so has his mother. They both have their own grown-up families. And when David is born from this new marriage, he's growing up with the grandchildren rather than the children. And the family themselves, they're stolid country types, but David is anything but. I mean, he has an IQ of something like 150 plus. He's off the scale. He's an absolute genius. When you realise that also he's been gifted with the music of a Beethoven, the poetry of a Shakespeare, the hand and eye coordination of a Bradman, and the military genius which has never been paralleled in the whole of history, you must understand the frustration of David growing up in a household full of country bumpkins. When David takes the cheeses to his brothers while they're standing around not fighting Goliath, and David comes up with ideas. The brothers give him a cuff around the ear and send him on his way, and David says, can I not even speak? So you can see there's a lot of tension in the family, and this has sort of led later in his life to him being unable to really act as a father. He's not had a father as an example, and when he has children of his own, he fails to discipline them. He lets them do their own thing. He's had no example to follow. And the story of Absalom's rebellion is a strange one. It starts with the rape of Absalom's sister by his half-brother Amnon. For 2 years, Absalom plots to destroy Amnon, his half-brother, David's eldest son, the heir to the throne. He kills him. He is exiled. He runs away for 3 years. He's brought back to Jerusalem, but for 2 years he doesn't see the king. And for 4 years, he's now, after that, when he has seen the king, 4 years to plotting to overthrow him. David's busy with affairs of state. Absalom goes to the city gate, and day after day, as petitioners come through looking for a judge, Absalom says, if only there was a judge in Israel. If it was me, I would deal with your case. I'd know what to do. And he wins the hearts of the people. And eventually persuades David that he could go to Hebron to sacrifice, and off he goes. And there he foments a rebellion, and David is forced to flee the city. Let's have a look at these verses again in the light of that, only very briefly. But here we read in verses 1 and 2, Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. So 3 times in those opening 2 verses, we read the word many. It's Jewish parallelism, the idea that things are repeated. How many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Now, these many included his son, Ahithophel, the priest, whose word was considered to be the word of God, and he turns and he's in the rebellion with Absalom, and the people themselves have turned against him. On his way out of the city, and don't forget he makes his way out of the city, down through the Kidron Valley, over the top of the Mount of Olives, he meets with a character called Shimei, son of Gera, who's of the house of Saul, and he pelts him with stones and mud and filth, and he curses him. And Abishai, Joab's brother, wants to chop off this chap's head, and David says, leave him alone. Leave him alone. Maybe God has sent him to curse me. Maybe the Lord sent him. And then verse 3, we read, but you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. So the psalm starts with David's concern. How many are my foes? How many are saying of me, God will not deliver him? But in this 3rd verse, we read that God is covering his life. He understands that God is his protection. You, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. And verse 4 speaks of David's call to the Lord. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. Now, David may have left Jerusalem, as I've said, but the Lord has not. The Lord has not left Jerusalem. And symbolically, David sends the ark back to Jerusalem with Zadok the priest and Abiathar and their sons. And they take the ark back, which is the symbol of God's presence. And it may feel at times as though our churches are closed and we're not meeting there. But God is still with us, and God is still the head of his church. We may not be in our churches, the buildings, but God has not left us or the church. And then the last 4 verses speak of David's confidence in the Lord. Verses 5 and 6, I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear though tens of thousands assail me on every side. David trusts God with his problems. He leaves them behind in his sleep. Now, we often say, don't we, we trust in the Lord. We give all our problems over to the Lord. But do we? Do we? Do we not tend to give them to God and then take them back again and worry over them as though God isn't big enough to deal with them? Whatever issues you're dealing with today, hand them over to the Lord and trust that he's big enough to deal with them. Then we get verse 7, and it's a strange, almost anomaly within the poem, but this doesn't only happen here. We find it in other psalms like Psalm 143 or Psalm 139. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. Now, the Hebrew uses the past tense here. So what it actually says is, you have delivered me, my God. You have struck all my enemies on the jaw. You have broken the teeth of the wicked. It's seen in historic past. It's seen as though something has already taken place. We struggle with this, don't we? The idea of seeking revenge. In Numbers 10 and 35 says, "Rise up, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered." C.S. Lewis speaks about this very interestingly in his book Reflections on the Psalms, a fascinating chapter about the cursings in the Psalms. And he said we shouldn't try to Christianize these, try and excuse them away. There is hatred there in the Psalms because of what's happened to a person. But we shouldn't say, oh, well, they didn't know any better. They only had an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. They had instructions to bless their enemies. If they saw their neighbour's ox wandering away and he was an enemy, they were to go and take him back to his neighbour and try and reconcile. So the work of reconciliation is there in the Old Testament as well. And finally we read, "From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people." David is concerned for his people. He is the anointed king. How different Absalom is from David. David, on the run from Saul for many years, would never strike down the Lord's anointed. Perhaps that's why he's considered a man after God's own heart. And even when he does return, a further rebellion breaks out. Bichri takes the 10 tribes of Israel off, and David has to send his soldiers to deal with that one. Being a king is a difficult and sometimes a lonely business. Being a Christian isn't an easy life. It is difficult. At times we can find ourselves lonely, but we always have God's people, and we always have God with us. And the psalm ends with a request that God may bless his people, because David loves the people, even though they've turned their back on him. May the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you and give you peace.